weather. So, okay, I'd like to welcome everybody back to Alabama Care. Today we are doing another part in our legislative advocacy. It is very important to know that your voting matters, your voice matters. And part of that process is getting to know your representatives and building a relationship with them. And today we have Dr. Wayne Reynolds, who is on the Board of Education in District 8. He is the incumbent. And we also have Mr. Todd Tomerlin, who is a father and a constituent in District 8. We also invited Mr. Rex Davis, who is running against Mr. Reynolds for the seat in District 8 for the Board of Education. However, he is not here with us today. That being said, I'd like to hand it over. Mr. Reynolds, if you would introduce yourself. Or Dr. Reynolds, I apologize.
Yes, I'm Wayne Reynolds. I live in Athens. I represent District 8 of the Alabama State School Board, which consists of all of Limestone, all of Madison, all of Jackson, and all of DeKalb County. I was first elected in 2018. Actually, I was solicited by many conservative groups and education groups in Alabama to run. I certainly didn't perceive myself as a politician, but I did run and was fortunate to be elected. You know, I was written up after the election by Mo Brooks and several others as the fact that I only spent $3,000 and my opponent spent $80,000 in the Republican primary. And I was fortunate enough to have the confidence of the people. In my term on the school board, I've tried to be representative of the constituency, not just my personal views, but try to understand and represent what I do. As with decades of experience, including being school superintendent, and subsequent to that, being a registered nurse, I understand the many facets that parents have to deal with in raising their children. I'm a combat veteran in Vietnam and paid for my education through the GI Bill. So I understand coming out of limited resources and still persevering to get an education. And that's basically the Wayne Reynolds that I can contemplate on.
Yes, sir. Well, we appreciate you giving us some of your time this morning and appreciate your service in the military. I'd like to ask, during your time on the Board of Education, what are some challenges that you have had during that term that the board has overcome?
Well, we face some, obviously, the most significant issue all of us have faced is the pandemic. And that's not something you can plan for. It was very reactive. We were responsive to the Center for Disease Control and the state health officer and the reality of what parents wanted and masking. But we survived that. But among other issues we faced is critical race theory and the perception of what's taught in schools. One of the overriding things that we've dealt with on a continuing basis was a report that Alabama ranked 52nd in academic performance, and that was based on a test that's really not attuned to really measure Alabama, but I can't, everywhere I go, I get mentioned to me, and I have to respond to that. We've dealt with the requirement of students taking and filing a financial report called FAFSA, and I voted against that. We had to deal with the adoption of math textbooks and some of the complications in our current math curriculum. And I try to respond. I haven't always voted yes, but I voted what I thought was best for Alabama schools.
Gotcha. And at this point, I would like Mr. Tomerlin, if you would introduce yourself.
Thank you so much, Alex, and thank you for hosting this in Alabama Care as well. And Dr. Reynolds, thank you for being here and your service to our kids throughout the state District 8. So my name is Todd Tomerlin. My son Gaze is 22 years old. He was diagnosed with autism at about the age 2.5. So me and my wife Tammy, who have been married 30 years, kind of began the road of advocacy several years ago at this point. I've served on several boards, Tennessee Valley and State UCP board. I was on the original Autism Task Force, which is now AIACC. Served on ADAP's board a couple of times. Currently serve on a board here locally called Make a Way that provides sensory rooms for all the local schools, which is a big deal for all of our students with disabilities. And I worked at Steelcase for 32 years, various jobs. So that's kind of, I guess, me in a nutshell.
And Dr. Reynolds was just saying how cool your wall is with all that Bama swag up there.
Yeah, he was talking about how much he loved it. Roll Tide.
Don't
At
Yes,
this,
entice
I'm a
me.
big
This is
old
my political event, and I'm not going to create a problem for myself.
Oh, I'm not gonna ruin it for you, bud.
well, we have a number of questions that Mr. Tomerlin would like to ask Dr. Reynolds. And at this point, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Tomerlin. And if you'd like to go ahead and start those questions, I'll kind of step in the background and then I'll be back to close us out at the end.
Okay, thanks so much, Alex. Dr. Reynolds, I tend to talk fast and mumble, so if I need to repeat myself, just please ask me to, okay? So this is something, and I also forgot to mention, I serve on the CAP panel, the Special Education Advisory Panel for the state. And this is kind of a question for myself, but it would help other parents understand kind of maybe some of the information that y'all see at the state board level. So my question is, are you providing special education performance profile data and reports for each of the systems that are in your district? If you do, how do you use the data to make recommendations to support closing the learning gap for students in your district?
Of course, we provide profiles, but one of the things that we certainly try to maintain is the confidentiality of those reports. And as you know, the Autism Advisory Council works closely with us. I've met several times with members of the Autism Advisory Council, and autism among the special ed disabilities is probably the one we're least capable of dealing with. I think the development of the sensory perception room, SENSORY, is an important component, and many times people don't understand the sensory overload that autistic children have. And I think the maintenance and control of education from the state board perspective, the state board provides guidance and mandates, but we rely on local school systems to implement those programs. And I think here in the county I live in, because of some activists and interested groups, they've increased the number of sensory rooms available.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much. So I was actually going to ask Mr. Davis this question, but since he wasn't able to join us, I'll just go ahead and ask you. Would you be willing to convene a task force that includes special educators and parents from the school system within District 8?
Absolutely.
So, okay.
I'm willing to meet with anybody and everybody about everything. As a matter of fact, today I have, I think, 5 different meetings to attend. And when you sent me this invitation, my response was immediate. So I'm certainly able and willing to do that. There are members of this district, several members of this district on the Autism Advisory Committee, and I've communicated with them with email and some with phone calls. So my availability is certainly documented.
Okay. So this next question is a long one. It's a 3-parter. So take your time. And like I said, if I need to repeat something, just please ask. But so recently there were concerns over recently released State Department of Education's plan to address the special education teacher shortages. A provisional certificate is being developed where someone with a bachelor's degree in any field can be hired to teach special education, and that's just grades 6 through 12. The candidate agrees to take 5 designated special education courses and complete yet to be developed State Department modules and pass the Praxis. So you're aware of that, I'm sure, because I know it went through the state board.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Let me start with a couple of things that have happened. One of the good things that have happened is the legislature gave a very appropriate but generous raise. And as a result of that, we've seen a dramatic reduction of the number of teachers who plan to retire. We've actually had list of teachers who were retiring withdraw that retirement request. In addition, we've adopted a provision where anybody who has retired that's had a teacher certificate, if they just request the teacher certificate, it will be reinstated without taking the CEUs. As a matter of fact, at the last board meeting, I asked Superintendent Mackey, that involved me, and so I've applied to have my teaching certificate reinstated. And I think last month we had 500 requests in Alabama for the reinstatement of teaching certificates. Fortunately, in much of this district, particularly in Madison County and Limestone County, and most of in Scottsboro and the city of Fort Payne, we don't have some of the shortages. So when you hear generalized discussions of shortages, sometimes we're approaching statewide issues which may or may not be impacting us locally. Because fortunately, the area we live in, the rapid growth allows us to bring in a lot of people from the outside who want to live here. As a matter of fact, there was a report, I think in Newsweek or something, that reported that Huntsville is the most desirable city in the United States to live in. So that lets you recruit people.
Yeah, absolutely it does. So based on on the things that came about, I mean, what are your thoughts on the provisional standards? Is it, you know, I mean, I know y'all are in a tight position to be able to maintain some of these teachers and to recruit new teachers. But what are your thoughts on the provisional standards?
Well, provisional is not the first choice. Provisional is a provision for shortages. There are school systems in this state that cannot find teachers willing to live there. Not only just be certified, but willing to live there. And some of those, the need for provisional certificates are profound. And there has to be an accommodation for children across the state to have teachers in place. And some of those provisional certificates are from people who don't have education degrees. Some of the requirements to get teacher certification have a lot to do with the context of taking education courses than having competence in teaching or in competence in subject areas. And that's why the provision of the decision to provide provisional certificates were made. And that's why they're just not handed out and you get a right to go do something. It's kind of like a learner's permit for driving. You have to perform and still take additional training. And I think that's appropriate.
Okay, yes, sir. Secondly, if a provisionally certified hire does not pass the Praxis, what suggestions would you make to the State Department to address the students not receiving instruction and support by a qualified teacher?
The concept of the Praxis for any teacher certification is under discussion at the state board level. There are deans who want to remove the Praxis as a requirement. The Praxis is a standardized test which really focuses on basic knowledge in a wide scheme. Right now, I have not decided on my position for Praxis. I have one dean from a large university that says under no circumstances does he want to see the Praxis removed. But that school has high entrance requirements. There's another dean in the city I live in who says that if the Praxis got eliminated, he would have 70 new teachers available. So I asked him, of that 70 teachers, what is your total population involved? And he said 700. And my response, well, Dean, if you have only 70 students out of 700 that can't pass the Praxis and you have open enrollment, that may not be a bad thing. So we're still studying the Praxis. There's some pressures from particularly some groups that cannot get certified teachers to eliminate the Praxis. But you realize that if you put less qualified teachers in the employment environment, those teachers are going to go to the systems and the environments that are least attractive to all teachers. So there's two sides of that story. And I think the state board is working through, all 9 of us are working through that discussion.
Very good. So the third part of this and final part of this question is, would you support cameras being added to classrooms for monitoring and identifying teacher training needs? Texas and Georgia have already passed such legislation.
I would support the concept of cameras, but I also would not want one person to be able to invade the privacy of others. If I were watching a classroom with your child in it, I might have one perception of what your child's relationship was with a teacher, or I would get data and information about other children, not my children, which may or may not be appropriate. I don't think there's anything wrong with cameras with recording capabilities, that if a parent or administrator wanted to review that data, that's fine. But one of the persons, some of the people want live feed, and that has some ramifications of privacy concerns and HIPAA concerns that must be accommodated.
Yes, that's very true. Yep. So besides attending state board school meetings, what can or will you do as a state board member of education to engage parents and teachers from your district? And it was kind of a, I guess, piggyback question to what you answered earlier, but I will say that I think I'm not going to speak for typical parents, but I know sometimes special need parents feel like their voices aren't heard. And obviously, you're available. You said that people can call you and email you. What, do you have any other suggestions that I could follow to make their voice
I'm
heard?
well known. I think the role of people like me and politicians and people like you are to communicate. It's not my job to be state board member and set myself apart. It's my job, and that's why I ran in 18. Wasn't that I needed a job, because I'm 75 years old. It's my desire to go back to the classroom. I'm a registered nurse, so I understand the healthcare problems as well as the educational problems of our students and parents. And I can't tell you how much I'm available. I go to the schools, I go to graduations, I will go to the schools, and part of the reasons that I intend to get my teaching certificate reinstated is so that I can go into school and actually do substitute teaching. And I think there needs to be credentialing and background checking, and that has to be done even for me as a state board member to have my certification reinstated. So I think we need to be available, and the persons who have concerns need to treat it civilly. I don't mind putting myself out, but I think there has to be a commitment of mutual respect. And I assure you, I respect every constituent that I deal with, whether they agree with me or vote for me or even dislike me. My responsibility is to listen and to accumulate that information and have it affect my decisions, not necessarily direct my decisions.
Thank you for that. So in 2021 legislative session, the $50 million financial math and science teacher incentive program was passed. You kind of touched on that earlier. Many parents and educators feel the longstanding teacher shortage in special education was overlooked, me being one of those parents. According to at least one legislator, special education was not included in the incentive program because it was not brought to their attention by Department of Education leaders. Um, that was a big deal for us. We felt like that special education teachers, and I know you got to tackle one thing at a time, and we understand math and science was struggling obviously in those fields. But do you have what are your thoughts on incentivizing special education teachers? I know I've heard rumors that there's possibly something in the works. I won't mention it because it may or may not, and if it's something you can speak on, I'll let you do that. But what are your thoughts on that?
Well, deal with large pay increase for experienced teachers is going to help, because there are a lot of special ed teachers that it's really a strong learn on your job function, and you know that. It's like like you said, it was learn on the job as a parent. Being a parent of a disabled child is not something you just inherently know how to do.
No.
And I think the same consideration should give to special ed teachers. Now, there was a concept called the Numeracy Act that was passed for mathematics enhancement, where we'll put mathematics specialists into schools, and those specialists will deal with special needs children who have needs to learn mathematics and language arts. And those programs are not exclusively restrictive to special needs children, because, as much as possible, the special needs child needs to be in the mainstream of education. You and I all know the limitations to that. It's a great sounding that everybody ought to be mainstreamed and together and not isolated, but the math and language arts enhancements should, and I hope will, and intend to make certain, extend to special needs children.
Very good. So if well, I guess that was going to be my next question. We're almost done here, Dr. Reynolds. So you're knocking them out pretty good. Thank you. Research is clear on the benefits of inclusive education practices for students with and without disabilities. How do you envision the state guiding local schools to implement inclusive education practices, invest in necessary professional development, and move from monitoring to a meaningful change?
Well, inclusiveness is desirable, but special instruction and special identification and services are also essential. It sometimes almost seems contradictory to talk about special needs programs and inclusive programs. And that's why we have an individual education program, an IEP. And if you really involve the parents and the providers for children's programs, students' programs, and really thoughtfully explain to the parents and to the other teachers, the mainstream teachers and the special needs children, how those components work together, then you can devise and implement a program that fits the children. Inclusiveness is important, but also specialized assessment and providing those special programs is equally important. You mentioned the sensory perception rooms. Everybody doesn't understand what that really means and why that's necessary. But there are children who are not necessarily diagnosed as autistic or other situations, ADHD, who could certainly benefit from sensory perception rooms. But I've had parents approach me and they perceive the sensory perception rooms as an isolation, almost as a punitive measure. So we have to be reasonable. We have to communicate, and we have to understand the things that we may do can be perceived in various ways by various people. And that whole idea of inclusiveness, Todd, I'd like you to tell me, turn it around. As a parent with a 22-year-old that's gone through this much program, what is your perception about what we should be doing or how we can do it better?
Well, I have a lot of thoughts, and they're not all, I guess, in agreement with like every sort of needs parent. Like one huge I have is when Gaze was younger, 7th grade possibly, terribly struggling in math. I wanted them in the resource room to work on basic math. I just wanted him to be able to balance a checkbook, and was told not just by the teacher, not by the principal, superintendent. It went all the way to state level. And at the time, I wasn't involved in state boards. That they couldn't go backwards in education. They were working on algebra or whatever it was, and that's what they had to focus on. Gage is 22 years old and had an IQ test a year ago, and he's just above second grade level. But of course, he graduated. So, and listen, I'm not blaming a teacher. I'm not blaming anyone. People struggle with different subjects. Gage's is math. But to not be able to work on what a child needs at that moment, I mean, he was obviously not ever going to use algebra. So why focus on algebra? Let's just do basic math, division, addition, subtraction, that kind of stuff. So that's just kind of one of those things. And then with and I struggle with this, and I'd love to get your thoughts on this. So, obviously, it's kind of one of those things where it's like, well, listen, you're asking for inclusiveness, Dad, but now you're saying you don't want your son included. As far as the grades go, and all students across the board, the grades are reflected on that school's academic achievements, right, or scores. So for years and years, I thought, well, just get better at what you're doing. But then I thought, you know what, maybe not, maybe disclude, especially the kids with IEPs, maybe disclude their numbers in the school's rankings, because it may not give them, I guess it may not shed a light on really how good they're doing, right? I mean, like obviously,
Absolutely.
you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So,
You're absolutely
but
correct
then,
about that testing data.
right. So then I had a lot of parents say, well, Todd, if they do that, then they won't work with them. And I said, well, in my eyes, they weren't working with him anyway, because like I said, he was getting, good grades in algebra, but couldn't do 2 + 5. So my point was he was being kind of pushed on anyway. And I think that goes for some typical students as well, not just special needs kids, and that's just my thought. But I guess my question is, what are your thoughts on not including the kids with IEP, not including their data in the graduation rates, and then being able to focus on what those kids truly need in the classroom? If they can do algebra,
Well,
great. If
sometimes,
not,
Todd, a lot of
good.
things that happen, we're using data, and my doctorate's in statistics, and figures don't lie, but some liars figure, unfortunately.
Yeah, thanks.
And the examination of what data is included in the statewide report card is certainly under review. I know you've all heard that Alabama ranks 52nd because of one test, which is highly correlated with Common Core and
Yeah.
was not given to every student. And I deal with that every time I speak to a group, particularly with people who are adversarial to public education or to education in general. And yet, on the other hand, if we look at the ACT scores, there are 17 school systems that give the ACT. Out of 17, we're ranked 8th. That's an important criteria. The other
Absolutely.
function that we're planning to enhance is career technical education.
Yeah.
And that's important. We need to make certain that parents of special needs children are equally included in the opportunity for career technical education. Because I attended a program in Birmingham last week where they have a career tech center, which we intend to replicate in Huntsville. And the people like Brasco Gore and other employing institutions were offering students jobs, making more than master's degree teachers do out of
Yeah.
high school. So career technical education and really an inclusive IEP would have provided for your son's mathematics. I don't understand that. It's like the anecdotal story I gave about my experience with special ed children when I was superintendent. I mean, and there are children on the other end. There are children who are high achievers who do not want to take algebra. They should want to be taking calculus at that level. So the broad spectrum of students that we have, we need to offer a broad spectrum of courses. And I don't understand why they told you we cannot go back. You're not going back to a concept that your child didn't learn. That's not going back.
And that was my argument.
I don't understand terminology going back, because I'll give you another story. My grandson, when he was in the third grade, our family is pretty good at math. We're all engineers and mathematicians. And Stuart, who is in Madison City, was doing terribly in mathematics. And we didn't understand why. And my daughter, who is an chemical engineer, couldn't work with him because they use this Common Core math stuff. They didn't do it like you and I learned, Todd.
Yeah, right.
So as we analyzed our own grandchild's need, we determined that he didn't know the mathematics table. He couldn't do the math table that you and I learned.
Right.
So my wife, who is a teacher, made these flashcards up, and she worked with Stuart in the afternoon with the flashcards. And I asked Stuart one time, I said, well, how are you doing with your grandmother tutoring you? She said, oh, grandfather, she doesn't tutor me. She just holds up these cards and gets me the answer. Well, that's a remediation. He didn't even understand what we were doing, but once he got mathematics table, then he's achieving extremely well. And he's now a ninth grader. And we had to see ourselves as professional educators and leaders in education where that deficiency was. And even the school didn't quite realize what we were doing. But after we began to talk to the other teachers about the need we've dealt with our own grandchild, it's gotten a lot of attention, more attention about those basic skills, because it was not in Common Core, which people don't really understand what it was. They actually changed what they considered priorities in math, and they eliminated the real need to teach what they consider such basic things that children don't really need to learn. They can learn higher order skills and not learn the tables, and that's the foundation. I mean, you know,
it was a mess.
It's like, it is. We have to draw attention to it. And it was my personal experience that when I talk, and I've told that same story at the school board meeting, people says, oh my God, Wayne, I didn't know that. I said, that's true. And I told that to the school board in Madison City, and we're making a difference. We've got to make a difference incrementally. And I'm sorry that that experience happened with your son, but fortunately, he's only 22.
Yeah, we're still working on it. We're not giving up.
Oh, don't give up. Don't give up.
Oh, no, we'll never give up. So I want to go in and tell you once again, thank you. Yes, sir. Thank you again for your service and for joining us today. I've got one last question before I let you go, and just thanks again for being here. So, CAP is the Special Education Advisory Panel, the one I mentioned I serve on, and it's a working group that many times have not been included in special education issues, such as the teacher shortage decision with the provisional degree there. What can or will you do as a state board member to ensure that moving forward, the CAP panel's talents and skills will be used in future decisions regarding students with disabilities?
I've communicated with members. I'm sorry.
We'd love to have, we've invited him several times, Dr. Mackey, to come to meetings, and we know his schedule's very busy. We understand that.
Invite me. You've not invited me. The only answer I can give is to me. I represent you. I represent this district. And as you probably have guessed from this interview, I don't shy away from any questions. No. And I don't always know all the facts, but I'm willing to listen and to try to do better. And I think if we
that's all any of us can do.
We both have a role in that. that would be one of the suggestions, because I get communications, email, text, and phone calls from members of the Special Ed Advisory Committee, and certainly with the autistic lobby. I hate to use that term,
Right.
but
Yeah.
that's a correct
Uh,
analysis from my perspective. They have to speak for those children who can't always speak for themselves.
yes, sir. Absolutely. Well, thanks again so much. I guess we'll bring Alex back in if he's available to wrap it up.
I am, and I appreciate both your time. I just want to make a quick side note here. Mr. Tomerlin, you were talking about, your child's math and what the teacher said was kind of going backward. And I think it's really important for the student to be able to kind of have their own individualized program in school. And that took me
Well,
back. I was
he
in
had
second
one.
grade.
That was what was weird, Alex. I mean, it was in his IEP. It was just the fact that there was this archaic rule, I guess, out there that whatever was being worked on at grade level had to be worked on in the resource room at grade level, even though he wasn't
Yes.
working at grade level skills. That's what had to be worked on. It was insane, and
I don't
it
know.
kind
I
of
do not know what happened. I don't know the specifics.
yeah.
If you send me privately the details, I'll find out more information. But I don't think that I'm aware of that I ever dealt with a rule like that. It's kind of like the rule about what time you pick up children. The bus ran. Well, you make
Yeah,
modifications based on individual needs.
yeah,
And I think that if somebody told you there was a rule, show it to me in writing. It's like people have concerns about what's going on in the program and programs. I said, please provide me documentation in writing,
yeah.
and I'll deal with
Well,
that.
and I should have probably asked for
And
that
I don't
actual
know.
documentation,
I'm
but
not
but
aware
I
of
did
any
call.
rule.
Yeah, but I did call the state and explain the situation. And here's a little. I'll kind of leave you with this, um, and because I feel like it's an issue, but I have no problem with everything being done at the local level. Local school board, local superintendent, principals, all that. But there are times when things go awry that local's not handling correctly. And when you go to the state and bring it up, they'll flat tell you that, well, this is a local level or a local situation. You need to handle it with them. And you're like, well, I have been, and that's why I'm with you now. What can you do to help? Um, that happens a lot with I don't know about typical needs children, students, but it happens a lot in the special education world. Um, I mean, is that something you've ever run across? Where I mean, like, what are your thoughts on? Do you think the state should intervene in certain situations if you see that something at the local level is not on the up and up?
Absolutely. And one of the difficulties we all have in all aspects of government, not just education, but taxation and road building and everything, is finding the right person that will be responsive. And the Alabama State Department of Education is comprised of persons with various perspectives. My direction to you specifically, Todd, is the state superintendent has a role, but I'm an elected state school board member, and I sought that office for a reason, not to ride around and wave at the crowd, but to be a functionary. And if someone in my district has a concern, talk to me, because I know every superintendent personally. Not, that's the difference in my projection of what I'm able to do. I'm not
Yes, sir.
learning this job. I didn't win the last election because I spent the most money or put out the most signs. I won because people knew that I knew education and knew how to operate within the structure. And I can
Yes,
assure you, it's maddening. It was maddening to me as a superintendent, even with my children in schools. And
I bet.
so I know that you had a similar conversation with another board member, and I think that people cannot look at us in abstraction. Don't just vote for us, but call us. That's why I publish my cell number. That's why whatever question you ask me today or in the future, I'm available for this cast or anyone else you have. But
Well, thank
call your local school board member or call this school board member and don't accept no for an answer.
Well, thank you for your availability. Absolutely. Thank you. All right, Alex.
Yeah,
Thank you, buddy.
we appreciate that, but I feel like in speaking with parents, parents, some of them can feel frustrated at the local level, and I'd like to ask each of you to kind of give input. Todd, we'll start with you. In having some success in the school system, what would some advice be to other parents in communicating with their teachers and the local schools and making that success?
So, and I probably had to learn this the hard way. I really don't remember since it's been so long. But first of all, yes, you're fighting, for lack of a better word, for your child and his education or her education, and you want the best for him, whether it be the academic part, the social part, whatever it might be. But be cordial in all you do and say. Be respectful. Don't go in feeling like you have to be combative. Um, because there are going to be times that you may be put on the defensive that will just come out in you, but just don't go into a situation already feeling that way, because it does your everything is about your child. It's not about the principal, the teacher, the superintendent. It's all about your child. Put your child first. I had some great um, friends years ago when Gates was small, and they lived in Michigan. And anyway, the mom had gone in. Their son was older than Gage. He had autism as well. And anyway, she ended up working for the county in the autism unit. But she said like she would put a picture of her son, during the IEP, and like bring cookies, things like just make everybody feel comfortable. Hey, it's a meeting about your child's education, and be friendly, be respectful. And so I took that and I made a book, and I had a picture of Gates on each book, and it was a section about different aspects of autism overall, but then I had highlighted what Gates was specifically affected by, whether it be sensory, auditory, whatever it might be. And it was all referenced, right? It wasn't just Dad making it up. It was reference material, and I included the references, and then I passed that out. Had it all laminated and made up, and so yeah, just put your child first, and then like Dr. Reynolds said, if you do have issues down the road, reach out to your local school board member, or Dr. Reynolds himself, and hopefully it never comes to any of that. But put your child first.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And that's kind of, instead of it's a me versus you or us versus
Exactly.
them, refocusing on here, we're both here to solve this challenge for my child. So let's focus on their success and come together and make this work. Dr. Reynolds, some advice for parents and also for teachers and local schools to be successful, have that a successful relationship with their students and parents.
I guess the operative word is empathy. You have to understand the role of the person you're sitting with. And to use an old phrase that's often used, trust but verify. If somebody tells you, like Todd was told, that it's not within the normal sequence, and they say it's written down, show it to me. Because people in conversation sometimes say things that they only partially understand. And that's part of the way we talk. It's like you poor Alabama people don't understand how good Auburn is, but we work at trying to educate you. And we're still not giving up, even though we can't beat you in football, we can beat you in some other things. And that's the other aspect, is we realize we have different backgrounds, we have diversity, we do some things better than others, but we can always do things better no matter what we're doing.
Keep growing and keep learning. Well, once again, I really appreciate you both giving us some time this morning. We're going to make this into the YouTube video and send it out as well. And at this point, we'll go ahead and say goodbye. So we'll go ahead and wave at our cameras and say thank you once again for the audience and for our guests. And we will see you guys next time. And what you can do
Thank
is you
you
can
so
just click
much.
on it. Yes, sir. And you guys can